Hello, in this video, we're going to go over how to do a buyer review process in OnBase for non-PO invoices. The screen you're looking at now is the screen you see when you log into OnBase for the first time, unless you've set up some different options. The area we want to navigate to is called workflow. What we think of when we think of workflow, we want to think of it as a series of inboxes that an invoice must pass through to get paid. To find workflow, we navigate to the ribbon at the top and over in the right section. It's called workflow. I'm clicking on it right now. We just click on that, open it up, and we are now in the workflow area. In this left-hand area over here, we see the different inboxes that an invoice must go through. So first it comes into the project manager buyer review queue. After that, it will go into the budget level review queue. And then it'll go into the business office review queue, at which point the business office will review and send it to SAP for further processing. And then ultimately a payment to the vendor will be made. As I said before, we're going to be working in the project manager buyer review queue to get an invoice processed to get an invoice processed to get ready to send to the budget level review queue. What we'll do is we want to highlight all of these are the invoices that are in this queue. You can also see accounts over here of all those invoices. We have navigated to this Board of Water Commissions invoice, and you can see it displayed down here. So it's highlighted, the line is highlighted blue up here, and the invoice is displaying down here. It's kind of hard to see all of the invoice right now. So what we can do to make that invoice easier to see is just kind of move our mouse up here, and we see this, there's a line of distinction right here. And as we get closer to it, we get these double arrows. And to make this lower section bigger, we just click and drag this area up. And now you can see that we have a lot more real estate to look at this invoice. The invoice is still pretty big, so if we wanted to zoom in or out of this invoice, what we'll do is we just click and hold Control on our keyboard, and we can then zoom in and out by rolling the mouse wheel. If we roll the mouse wheel towards ourselves, we can see that the invoice gets smaller. If we hold the Control button and we roll the mouse wheel away from us, we can see that the invoice gets bigger. And so it's just a matter of preference at this point as to how big or how small you want that invoice to be for your review. We want to make sure that we are reviewing this invoice for several things. We want to make sure it's a vendor that we know we've received goods and or services from. We want to make sure it has an account number or an invoice number. We want to make sure it has detailed enough information for someone to understand what is being purchased. And we want to make sure there's no taxes on this invoice. And there's some other things you're going to want to check for, but the best bet to figure out all of those things you're going to want to check for is to work with your business office, and they can help guide you onto those things that you're going to want to double check when you're doing this invoice review. As I said, we're going to be processing this as a non-PO invoice. So we're going to pretend that I've reviewed this invoice for all of the thoroughness that needs to be performed on it, and I am going to get ready to send it to the budget level review. The first thing I want to do after my review is move up here to my ribbon at the top, and you're going to want to click on this display coding form icon. I'm popping open this icon, and what happens is we open another window. Waiting for this to load. You'll see it pops up, and we can actually move this over to another screen. If we have another screen, I'm not going to be able to do that because then you won't be able to see this coding form, but you could move it over to another screen and then still be able to see the invoice here, and then you have the coding sheet over here to code against. But I'm just going to move it over here so everybody can see what I'm doing. You see we have this bright yellow ribbon at the top here. That's telling us that this invoice isn't ready to process or move to the next next level. What we do want to do here is we want to make sure that the invoice date is right. And so we're looking right here, and we're looking on the invoice date here, and we see that it is not right. So we have 6/12 here, and I believe this has 12/6. So we're just going to want to change that real quick. So we'll just change this to a 12/6 to a 6/12 invoice date. Double checking, yep, 6/12. So we're just gonna, you can either click on your calendar here to change that, or we can actually just type it right in. So we can go 06/12/2019. And you see I didn't put any spaces in there, and it should take that. It did not, so we'll fix it this way. So anytime we're making changes up in this area of the coding form, we're going to want to make sure that we click Save up here. Clicking Save up here saves all of the changes that happened in this area here. So I'm clicking Save. And now that update's been saved. So then I'm going to want to make sure this invoice amount is right. Looking over here, we see the invoice amount is not right. Excuse me. So the invoice amount is right because we're only going to be paying the current charges. So 227109, and we have 227109. So we're good there. Next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to double check and make sure the vendor's name's right and the PO box and all of the information is right over here. And we'll double check that. And we see that information right here, and I'm doing a comparison, and it is correct. You can see it. You can see this information is tying to this information. So we're good to go. The next step we want to perform is to give the vendor some indication of what we are paying for. So we're going to type in here payment for, and this is the invoice number or account number. And then I think that'll be enough information, hopefully, for the vendor to understand how to apply the payment we're going to send to them. Once again, I made a change up here, so my next step is to click Save. So the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put in our coding information. The coding information involves where are we paying this invoice from. So think of that as what bank account are we going to use. The typical funding sources at CDOT are either going to be a cost center or they're going to be a project number. And then we're also going to want to fill out the function area, and we're going to want to get the GL. If we don't get the GL right, that's okay. The business office can fix it down the road, but we want to do our best to get it right as we can. So we click on our little pencil button, and it brings up our little blue box, add a new row. We're going to click on that. And now we have the ability to fill in cost center information. Please know that the information I'm putting in these fields are generic, and they're not necessarily specific to your work area. If you need to know what cost centers you're using and function areas you're going to use, definitely going to want to work with your manager and or your business office to help you identify those things. So I'm just going to start typing in a cost center here. And then we can click Tab, and that'll take us to the next. And since we're using a cost center, we're not going to be using a project number. And then we're going to put in our function area. Again, if you need to know this information, talk to your manager and or your business office. And then I'm just going to put in a GL here. Please know that this GL that I'm typing in isn't necessarily right for this invoice. And like I said, if you're not 100% sure, the business office can help you, and the business office could potentially fix this for you down the road. And here we see the type ahead functionality that OnBase will have. And when we start typing in that GL, when we get closer to a good GL, it'll start showing that GL, and we automatically can just click on that and it'll populate. And that's it. We really don't, for these non-PO invoices, we don't need to do anything else than a funding source, which is either going to be your cost center, your project WBS. For those of you that are thinking, well, I use grants, your grant number would go here, just the same as a project number. So think of the project, this project WBS, this can be used as a grant. And then we're also going to want to make sure, now that we've got the coding completed, we're going to want to make sure we get this invoice amount tied here, because if you have, let's say you're paying this bill across 3 different funding sources, you could actually do 3 different lines in here. You could do, and we'll go over that in another video, but we want to make sure we're telling OnBase how much we're paying for this one line as it relates to the invoice amount. Since we're not going to be coding to multiple lines here, I'm just going to put the entire invoice amount on in this line amount box. And that's it. We're ready to roll. What we want to do before that is we're going to click save. We see our little wheel down here turning, and it's done. And we lost, and you'll see that we've got that yellow ribbon has disappeared. If we entered this amount wrong, let's say we put in 22 and we transpose this number and we click save, we see that this yellow bar up here still tells us that we're short $54. So it's the difference between this amount and this amount. So it's a good way to keep track of how much you're coding when you're doing multiple lines. Again, that'll be covered in another video. So let's get this fixed. And we're good to go. Click save. We see our yellow line disappeared. We're in balance. We are good to go. Everything else looks good. So our next step is to click up here. We are going to go to save and close to close the coding sheet. And now we're back at our invoice. So the coding sheet's been done. And what we want to do now, we are done with our process. So our next step is to send this invoice to the budget level review, which is an easy step. We're just moving up here into our ribbon. And you'll see about middle of the screen, we have this send to budget level review. We're clicking here. And now that invoice is moved to the budget level review. I can show you where it's at here. And it was the Board of Water. And so now it is ready for the person who is responsible for doing your budget level reviews on invoices to complete. Thanks for taking the time. I hope this was helpful. Please look at other videos if you are in search or interested in learning more about OnBase.